Welcome back to Extra Literary Affairs, a podcast for the lit curious reader, because why not read a little bit of everything? I'm Jennifer Smith.
And I'm Joey Kelly.
And today, Joey and I will be exploring some of the larger themes in the Odyssey. We are in the middle of the summer of 2026. The Odyssey is everywhere. Joey, I think you and I were both really excited that the movie was going to come out because we have read independently in our past the Odyssey, the Iliad, a lot of text around it, and I know that we were very much looking forward to exploring this together. Instead of rehashing what the story is about in its minutia, we are going to jump right into some larger themes. The thing that I wanted to start with, Joey, just as a reminder to our listeners, that there are two major translators that we are aware of. One is Emily Wilson, who is a more contemporary translator who has a beautiful edition of the Odyssey, which came out many years ago, which we both are very familiar with. And then there's the classic Robert Fagel's version, which I have in my hot little hands here, of the Odyssey, that most of us were introduced to the Odyssey in school using this particular text. Joey, do you want to say anything about why you're excited to talk about the Odyssey at this time?
This is something that we have mentioned quite a few times. We bring up Greek myth a lot when we're talking about other stories because all things, at least in Western literature, seem to lead back to the Homeric epics, especially the Odyssey, because I feel like people are more acquainted with that one and less of the Iliad. As you mentioned, there is the Christopher Nolan movie that everyone is talking about, whether they like it or hate it, or maybe they're neutral on it. Emily Wilson's translation was the one that Christopher Nolan apparently used to create his film, although she was not a fan, as I'm sure a lot of people know by now, because she wrote a pretty scathing review. But yeah, we're still excited to talk about it. We will finalize our conversation with the film itself. We're both going to see the movie and tell you our thoughts as well. Even though I'm not a classicist, I'm not an ancient scholar, so take that with a grain of salt. We're just literature lovers and we're well acquainted with the Odyssey story. So hopefully everybody will be able to follow along. We're reading 8 books at a time. So today we'll be discussing books 1 through 8 and then keep going until we get all the way to 24.
Thank you for that, Joey. I wanted to start by pointing out the beautiful language in both versions of the Odyssey. And as we always encourage our listeners, when in doubt, go directly to the source text, read it yourself. I've had the privilege of reading both of these texts, but also listening. I spent today rolling around in the oral traditions of the Odyssey, both with Emily Wilson's version and the Robert Fagel's version. And while there is some very important overlap, the experience was very different for me. I will just give a little preview of how these two differ. And I will start with the Robert Fagel's version. Book 1, according to him, is called Athena Inspires the Prince. That is the title he gave. Sing to me of the man Muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course, once he had plundered the hollowed heights of Troy. Many cities of men he saw and learned their minds, many pains he suffered, heartsick on the open sea, fighting to save his life and bring his comrades home. But he could not save them from disaster, hard as he strove. The recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all. The blind fools, they devoured the cattle of the sun, and the sun god wiped from sight the day of their return. Launch out on his story, Muse, daughter of Zeus. Start from where you will. Sing for our time too. So that's the Robert Fagel's version. It's gets your attention. I was drawn in. I need to know more about the story. And then we get Emily Wilson's version. Her book 1, she chose to title The Boy and the Goddess. Tell me about a complicated man. Muse, tell me how he wandered and was lost. When he had wrecked the holy town of Troy, and where he went, and who he met, the pain he suffered in the storms at sea, and how he worked to save his life and bring his men back home. He failed to keep them safe, poor fools. They ate the sun god's cattle, and the god kept them from home. Now, goddess, child of Zeus, tell the old story for our modern times. Find the beginning. I love the brevity of Emily Wilson's translation, the poetry and the meter that she chose to write her version in is very different than the Fagles. I just really would like to encourage people to take a listen, find the version that works the best for you. I do not believe that we've found any instances where the factual information or the intent of the narrative has been changed by either of the translators. But as we stated, we are lovers of literature. We are not classic scholars, so we are not qualified to validate which one has the quote unquote right version.
I will say, though, that Emily Wilson is, I think, the first person in English to acknowledge that slaves are included. Female slaves are included in this epic. I haven't read the Robert Fagles one, but I believe he will refer to them as girls or servants or sometimes sluts or whores. Don't know, though, because I haven't read it, but that is what I've heard. Also, you mentioned the meter that Emily Wilson is writing in, and she's writing in iambic pentameter. So anybody that is familiar with reading Shakespeare, it's the same beats as Shakespeare. Not the way it was originally written in Homeric Greek, but as close as you can get in English.
And Joey, just one more ringing endorsement for Emily Wilson. She has, in her introduction to the Odyssey, an amazing compilation of facts about historical references, about the choices she made as a translator. I think spending the time to read the introduction, if that's the only experience that you have with her work, it's completely worth it. I can't state strongly enough how much that increased my enjoyment of the work by her doing all the background information and teeing us up to have a good experience.
Yeah, I think introductions, especially into something like this, and same with Shakespeare, I would say, very different times that these were written in, gives you a lot of that important context that if you're not familiar with ancient Greece or Greek mythology at all, that would provide a lot of great context and fill in a lot of the gaps, because there is a lot of information in each of these books. So you could get lost pretty quickly, especially with all the names.
Yes, Joey. Do you want to kick off our conversation by talking about what this poem represents about the patriarchy and the way that females are introduced into the text?
As I said, we read books 1 through 8, and so we're going to be discussing those. Again, not exhaustively, because that's a lot of information. We could have whole hour-long episodes about each book, if not more. There's a lot of information in there, but they're also very fun to read. Anyway, so for anybody that has read so far up to this point in the Odyssey, there are a lot of women characters. And we start with Athena, of course, because she is prevalent throughout this entire poem. We're introduced to a lot of characters like Calypso and Penelope, of course, and Nausicaa. There's so many. It's going to be a long list. I'm not going to bring them all up. And they all are very important to the story in different ways. But according to classicist Mary Beard, who's also the head judge at the Booker this year, love her so much. Okay, the Booker long list just came out on the 28th. So, start reading that, you guys. Anyway, she had mentioned it in an interview with the Guardian newspaper that this is really a woman's poem, even though she acknowledges that maybe this is not the perspective that a lot of scholars would take, but she sees this very much as a poem about women and their roles in ancient Bronze Age Greece. I think there's a lot of moments in the story so far from the first 8 books where we get a lot of impactful moments. And one of those that has stuck out to me specifically is very early on, where we get a conversation between Calypso, who is the goddess who is keeping Odysseus on her island, and he's been there for like 7 years. And then the gods deliberate. Athena is, of course, included in this. And Athena's like, come on. He suffered enough. He was at Troy. He's been here for 7 years. Like, let him go. Okay. And Zeus is like, okay, yeah, but Poseidon's like, kind of pissed about it. So maybe we shouldn't do that.
Take it up with him.
Yeah, but he's like, okay, like, yeah, I get it. He should go. I'm just giving a little recap. So Hermes goes down to Calypso, and this is where the conversation happens. Calypso confronts Hermes on the hypocrisy of patriarchal rule in this case, because she's talking to one of the Olympians. I'll just read that little brief conversation of what she says in return from the text from Emily Wilson. Calypso shuddered and let fly at him. You cruel, jealous god, you bear a grudge whenever any goddess takes a man to sleep with as a lover in her bed. Just so the gods who live at ease were angry when rosy-fingered Dawn took up Orion and from her golden throne chased Artemis, attacked and killed him with her gentle arrows. Demeter, with the cornrows in her hair, indulged her own desire, and she made love with Iason in triple-furrowed field, till Zeus found out, hurled flashing flame, and killed him. So now you male gods are upset with me for living with a man I saved. Zeus pinned his ship and with his flash of lightning smashed it to pieces. All his friends were killed out on the wine dark sea. This man alone, clutching the keel, was swept by wind and wave and came here to my home. I cared for him and loved him, and I vowed to set him free from time and death forever. Still, I know no other god can change the will of Zeus, so let him go, if that is Zeus's order, across the barren sea. And then she goes on a little bit more. But my point is that Calypso is very courageous and says to an Olympian, Hermes, he is one of the Olympian gods. There's 12. I think there's actually 13. But anyway, it doesn't matter. And she very bluntly says, like, no, this is hypocrisy. I'm allowed to keep this mortal and have sex with him all I want. Okay? That's the deal. I just
Finders
absolutely
keepers.
love that. Yeah, finders keepers.
And Joey, I love that you called out this passage because I did look it up in Fagles while you were reading yours. I just want to read one little bit that I think is even more clarifying that says, the lustrous Calypso shuddered at those words and burst into a flight of indignation. Hard-hearted you are, you gods, you unrivaled lords of jealousy, scandalized when goddesses sleep with mortals openly, even when one has made the man her husband. So for her, as you stated in Emily Wilson's version, calling out like, gods, you guys are jealous. Get over it. Nobody's throwing a red card that you are sleeping with everyone on the planet. But when a woman empowers herself to say, I found this guy, I saved him, he's alone in the world, I've offered him everything. We'll hear more about Calypso's story. She's like, I've offered him everything, including the opportunity to be immortal. She will give that opportunity to him, and he declined. You guys don't get to tell me what to do. And I just thought it was really interesting. We've talked about this before in previous episodes. When we think about the Greek myths, they are so flawed as characters. They're jealous, they're petty, they hold these rivalries. You'd think a god in our Western tradition is like, that's the high morals. That's a person who's really going to lead the way. And it's like, oh no, gods, they're just like us, right? It's that funny little bit of you hoped for more from them, but they sometimes just deliver very petty and human emotions.
Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge as well that the story makes it seem as if Odysseus is only trapped when he decides he no longer is sexually attracted to Calypso. Because I assume from one of the mentions that Odysseus tells us is that is when he's like, I want to go home now. Like, I've had my fun. I've been here for quite a few years now. It's been great. We've been rolling around in the bed. Okay. But now I'm over you. And now I want to go back to my real life. I don't really see Odysseus necessarily trapped. I mean, he physically could not get off the island, but I have a feeling he was having a pretty good time. Did he try? Did he say like, hey, Calypso, this is great, but I really want to go home. I don't want to be here for 7 years. I don't know. I don't think he said that.
Well, on year 7, maybe it occurred to him, it was like, hey, wait, how long have I been here? Am I supposed to still be going home? I need to go home. One of the things that we're going to talk about more in depth later is how much crying and longing for home. The reason I brought up the piece that I thought was very important in Calypso's story, she's like, I want a husband. I found one. I have one. I'm a goddess. I'm beautiful. I'm tall. I'm smart. I own my own island. What are you leaving me for? It's just very interesting because it comes out in that plaintive way of, I'm better looking than your wife, right? You know that I can give you immortal life and we can stay here forever. And he was like, yeah, that sounds great. But what I actually want, if you don't kill me, I just want to go home and see the smoke from Ithaca, from my island. I just want to have one last glimpse of my homeland. And this idea of even when a goddess offers you paradise, the only thing you are stating that you actually want is what you left behind. You want to go back and resume the life that you left at this point 17 years ago.
Yeah, I think you do have to take into consideration that Odysseus messes around a lot with a lot of women. Just in the Odyssey, he's going to sleep with a lot of women. It's important to talk about that. I think this is sort of like a love story as well between Penelope and Odysseus. I think they genuinely love each other despite his dalliances, his many dalliances. Penelope, of course, does not do that, although she has quite a few suitors that she could definitely pick from, and I kind of wish that she did. And be like, well, he's not been back. I mean, I'm not going to leave him, but I could have a little fun. Maybe she does, and it's not written down. Maybe someone took it out, but I don't know. I think you can see a lot of their longing for one another, both for Penelope, for Odysseus, and vice versa. I think that's an important aspect to Odysseus because he's not a perfect person and he's not our typical hero. He's not morally superior, as you're talking about with the gods, where you would think that these deities would be our moral compass in a story, and they're absolutely not. You should not do anything that they do. Whatever they do, do the fucking opposite. And Odysseus has moments where he is very courageous and he might make a good choice, but he's a fallible human being. And I think it's important to consider that when we're reading the Odyssey, because we cannot assume that he is going to be taking the moral high ground every single time, because he's absolutely not going to do it. And you'll be disappointed.
Joey, thank you for taking us back to the idea that Penelope is required and expected, and it goes down in her permanent record, that she is chaste. She did not step outside her marriage out of her love and commitment for her husband. And we see time and time again throughout this whole story that women are expected to be chaste, pure, virginal. There's a lot of references to that. Nobody's throwing that idea out for the men in the story. Zero people mention that maybe you should keep it in your toga. Nobody is really giving them a hard time for that. One exception to that is that one of the characters, and because there are so many, I'm not going to recall which one it is, but it's a major character in the story, decides that he wants to take someone else's wife. And everyone warns him that's not going to end well. Helen of Troy is captured and whisked away. One part of the story is that, oh, it was so awful. I was abducted. I'm the victim here. And other people are like, are you sure you didn't already have a bag packed and ready to go just in case the city gets sacked?
Paris.
Yes. And so it's very interesting when we're talking about women's rights and looking at this from a feminist lens, as Mary Beard, I believe, is very much looking at it. It is curious about the expectations societally at that time and perhaps, yesterday, that separate what men and women are allowed to do sexually in society and still be deemed respectable.
I mean, certainly chastity was a great characteristic for women to have. Now we can look at the gods or the goddesses. Athena and Artemis are both virginal. They are chaste. They refuse to get married or have sex to fend off their siblings and their relatives, other gods, from raping them. Yeah, it's very much still an important thing, this idea of purity.
Thank you for saying that, because physical threat of the gods towards their female relations was a thing. Athena very much loves Odysseus. She loves him and appreciates who he is, and she's always meddling in his business. She's a bit obsessed with him, but there was never a physical, carnal love that they shared. It was more of this admiration and obsession with Odysseus.
Yeah, and maybe because he's sort of her champion, and so she gets a lot of praise because he's a successful warrior. I don't know, but I would assume that there's something in it for Athena, and that is why she's probably doing it, not just for the goodness of her heart. I don't think any of the gods, maybe Hestia would have done something out of the goodness out of her heart, but I don't think Athena would. I don't know. I don't know her like that. But I do want to talk about Penelope because obviously she's a major character in the story as Odysseus' wife. And again, I'll go back to Mary Beard because she brings up a very excellent point. In book one, after Athena gives Telemachus his pep talk, and it's like, no, you can do it. You're so strong. You're such a big boy, big boy now. Like, you could do it. I mean, obviously she's disguised. Anytime I mention Athena, she's mostly in disguise. Okay. She will typically take the form of mentor and during this part. So after she does that, Telemachus is like, yeah, actually I am a boss ass bitch. I can actually kick out all these suitors and I'm going to go and I'm going to find out about my dad. I'm going to go to Sparta and Pylos. I'm going to talk to Menelaus and Nestor and find out the tea on my dad. Okay. I'm going to really modernize it. And to Mary Beard's point, she says that after Telemachus is empowered and feeling very strong about himself, that we get the first example of a man telling a woman to shut up. Okay, so that's fun. That's a tradition we definitely want to have start. It's Telemachus telling his mother to shut up, basically. So this is a different translation. I'm not sure which one Mary Beard was using. There wasn't a footnote or anything like that. It might be Robert Fagel's. I don't know which one she was using, but this is from an article that I will link so that everyone can read it because it's very interesting. It says, "Mother, go back up into your quarters and take up your own work, the loom and the distaff. Speech will be the business of men, all men, and me most of all, for mine is the power in this household." So maybe that's Robert Fagel's. I don't know.
It is not. I was
All right.
reading
Oh, there
along
you
with
go.
you. And the next sentence I think is important in the Robert Fagel. So we're going to be doing a little cross translating here. So he's like, "I hold the reins of power in this house." Astonished, she withdrew to her own room. She took to heart the clear good sense in what her son had said. I'm like, no, she didn't. She's like, that little whippersnapper is bossing me around. I have the suitors to deal with. I've been holding this place together for 10 years while my husband's been doing God knows what. And yes, God did know what Odysseus was up to the whole time. And I appreciate you calling out through Mary Beard, the mother is silenced. But the scene directly before that, Joey, is they're listening to a poet sing about Odysseus and what had happened in Troy. And the mother's like, nobody needs to hear this. You know 1,000 poems. Do we need to hear this one right now? And the son's like, Mom, you don't get to tell the poet what he gets to sing about. That's not your view. And so that he closes her down on that. And then he also launches into, and another thing, I'm in charge now. Why don't you just go back to your loom and I'll take it from here? And I just thought that was really quite interesting.
Yeah. And I just want to read from Mary Beard from what she wrote in this article, because it gives us really good context. We were just talking about translation, but from Homeric Greek. I do not know if Mary Beard does. She writes, "There is something faintly ridiculous about this wet behind the ears lad shutting up the savvy middle-aged Penelope. But it's a nice demonstration that right where written evidence for Western culture starts, women's voices are not being heard in the public sphere. More than that, as Homer has it, an integral part of growing up as a man is learning to take control of public utterance and to silence the female of the species. The actual words Telemachus uses are significant too. When he says speech is men's business, the word muthos, okay, sorry I don't speak the Greek, that is as close as I'm going to get, not in the sense that it has come down to us of myth. In Homeric Greek, it signals authoritative public speech, not the kind of chatting, prattling, or gossip that anyone, women included, or especially women, could do. So I think that context is really important because we talk about this in translation with other works as well, in modern or contemporary ones, where there is a lot of nuance that comes with a different language outside of English. And you lose a lot of that nuance and complexity. So you take that one word, muthos or mythos, sorry, whatever one it is, someone who knows Homeric Greek, feel free to correct me on that. That gives a signal that people who would be listening to it, as you mentioned in the beginning, this was oral tradition, of course, in the beginning before language was written, had that word exactly been used, you could say. But if someone were to hear that and spoke the language in ancient Greece, they would have understood the difference in what he was saying immediately without having to have any of that context. But in English, we understand what he's saying, but we don't understand that nuance of differentiating between types of language and differentiating between different types of speech. What is important speech, men's speech, public speech, or gossiping and talking about inconsequential things? So important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, it reminded me of grandstanding. It's like, stand back. I'm about to say something really interesting instead of just day-to-day conversations. It also reminds me of things that you've talked to me about in the past about coded language. The word choice that a certain group of people may use will signal to the people who are like them. It's like, oh, when I say this word, you have a much broader knowledge of what this is about, rather than a casual listener. So I thought that was also really interesting. They're already using coded, loaded language to really drive home their point.
Yeah, it's definitely a sophisticated idea that, again, it's just so annoying sometimes when you're like, why don't I know anything else other than English? Oh my God, this is so annoying. because maybe this works better in different languages that are still spoken today. Maybe that nuance comes through really easily, but in English it definitely does not, which is disappointing. My point in bringing up specifically Calypso and Penelope are that we have a lot of instances of these really powerful women. Calypso is a goddess. She is physically powerful. And as you said, she is this woman that has her own island. Okay, that's success in my book. I don't know the extent of her power as a goddess, but Penelope is overseeing a kingdom of Ithaca here. So even though she's not in charge of it while Odysseus is gone, he has given that to someone else, she still holds a lot of power. It's just interesting how we can see how restricted these powerful women are and what they are allowed to say and what they're not. It's interesting as we continue to see when we are introduced to a woman character, what is she going to be able to say? What is the context in what she's saying? Who is she saying it to? Who's around? Who's listening to what she's saying? I think Nausicaa is another good example later in the story. I'm talking about books 1-8, where before Odysseus is ready to leave her island, there's a lot of islands. She's like, you got here because of me. You owe me something because I did this for you. I put my neck out for you. So just remember that, Odysseus.
And Joey, I do appreciate that you say that because there's so much pushback from men about these women and their power. I think there will be other instances in Greek myth where perhaps the female character, the wife, wreaked some havoc against one of the male gods. I'm thinking of Hera, but that's for another day, Joey.
Love Hera.
Love Hera. She's not having it.
She's misunderstood, and I will die on that hill.
I'm sure that we will explore that further at another time, Joey. Do you want to transition to talking about how much emotion is shown by the men in this particular portion of the poem?
Yes. Since we were talking about Calypso to begin, we first see Odysseus when he is on Calypso's island. And Hermes, as I said, comes to say, you gotta let him go, okay? Zeus and Athena are like really upset about it now, and they're totally serious, and you have to let him go. And she's like, whatever. Anyway. And he's like, well, where is he? And she's like, oh, he's like crying at the beach again. He's always doing that.
Same old, every day.
Yeah. And we see Telemachus is also a crier. A lot of the men in this story are criers, and that's totally fine. I think it's really shocking if you're reading this for the first time and you go in with this assumption that someone like Odysseus, who survives the Trojan War, really decimates the Trojans. It's his idea to do the Trojan horse, which really messes those Trojans up and changes the war to the Greeks' benefit. You would assume that he's going to be very stereotypically masculine, where he's not going to show any emotion, unless it's anger, because of course that is the one, at least contemporaneously, that is the one emotion that is okay for men to express, but he does not. He has a full range of emotions. And when he is on Calypso's island, he is upset because he's longing for his home and for his wife and for his son. And he's grieving for everyone that he has lost at Troy and along the way after Troy, because obviously he's alone at this point and he didn't leave Troy alone. So there is a lot of reflection in this story about what has happened specifically in Troy. Now, if you haven't read the Iliad, I don't think it's 100% necessary to have read it, but it does provide a lot of context for what is going on in his head. And obviously Troy comes up a lot. So if you're not super familiar with that, maybe try reading it after you're done. Although this is after the Trojan War. Not saying that this is the sequel to that. But anyway, I think Telemachus has a really great moment with his best friend.
Which brings up a good point, Joey. There's almost an endless list of characters and pronunciation of names that just do not roll off our tongue. So if you as a reader are like, which guy is this guy again? That's a totally normal response, because I think you would have to have an insane memory to get them all in the lineup the first time through.
A lot of them I do know, but I think it's pronounced Telemachus is traveling with his new BFF Pisistratus. In this moment, I think he's in front of Menelaus, and Telemachus is crying because he's like, I miss my dad, although I don't really remember him because I was basically a newborn when he left, but I still grieve for my dad, and I'm grieving for my living situation because there's all these deadbeats living in my house, and they're eating us literally out of house and home. How they have enough livestock to survive, I don't know, but anyway. So I just want to read what Pisistratus says in return when it's sort of like, you shouldn't show emotion. He says, King Menelaus, when we spoke of you back home in our halls, my father Nestor always declared you are exceptional for common sense. So now listen to me. I disapprove of crying during dinner. Dawn will soon come. Weep them. There is no harm in mourning when a person dies. It is the only honor we can pay the dead, to cut our hair and drench our cheeks with tears. And he goes on to say he lost a brother, whatever. But I think it's really important that he's specifically talking to Menelaus here as well, where, I mean, again, read the Iliad if you want to know more the context of why Menelaus is so important here. But obviously he's married to Helen, which is one of the impetuses. There are other factors, but the main one that gets blamed for Helen's running away to Troy with Paris. Another person that you would think is stereotypically very masculine. He survived Troy. He fought a lot there. He has a lot of fighting. He's a very brave man. And so you would think that Telemachus wouldn't want to show emotion, especially as he is this teenage boy who is trying to come into his own power as the heir apparent, I guess, of Ithaca. So you would think like, oh no, I don't want to show any emotion. I don't want to be considered weak. But Pisistratus makes that important note to say like, okay, no, we shouldn't be crying over a dinner. That's killing the vibe. But it is important to grieve for the dead. That is an important part of the human experience. So I really like that it's sort of deconstructing what we think of as stereotypically masculine.
Yeah, and I appreciate the right emotion at the right time. As you said, don't ruin dinner. There is a time. One of the greatest honors you can do is to mourn for the dead, to celebrate the lives that they had. There's a lot of ritual that goes around that in this poem. I really appreciate you calling that out, Joey. These stone cold killers, they are murderers, they're warriors, they're doing their thing, but they also will weep for what was lost, both for themselves and the people around them. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember in context. It's not just Penelope or the slave girls or the old women in the story are not the only ones seen weeping. It is a universal human experience. I don't think we ever see a god weep, though, but I could be wrong on that.
Not so far, at least, but I can't think of any story they really cry.
If they have an emotion, they just wreck something. They just go and blow things up and smite them with lightning bolts or turn them into animals. They find other outlets for their emotional regulation.
I'm sure that there are stories where the gods cry, but definitely not yet. We don't see too many gods. Just in the beginning of the story here, see like Zeus, Athena, Hermes, Poseidon. Yeah, but we'll see. Maybe they'll cry. I don't know. I doubt it, though. They don't seem to cry.
Poseidon would cry over the loss of his kid, and we'll just leave it at that. We'll talk more about that in our next episode.
Yeah, Polyphemus.
But I don't know if we read the words that he's crying. We know he's
certainly pissed,
bereft. He's really not handling that loss well.
Yeah, truth. That's coming right up after this. But our next episode will cover that, the Cyclops. This time reading it, I really sat and thought Odysseus cries when he's on Calypso's Island, and when he's on Phaeacia, where Nausicaa lives, there is another bard. No one knows that this is Odysseus because nobody had pictures of him. Okay, so nobody knows, and he certainly hasn't told them yet in up to book 8. He's listening to a bard singing about his own deeds at Troy, and of course he starts crying because he's like, oh my God, you guys, I did do that. That actually did happen. It really made me sit and think this time, of course he has to be upset. He spent 10 years at war. 10 years. I don't believe that he wanted to leave his family or to leave Ithaca. He had a newborn baby, okay? I don't think he wanted to go. And he saw so many of his friends die. And I feel, probably has some regret about his actions at Troy, especially with the Trojan horse. I couldn't imagine how difficult that must be for him. And having all of these trials and tribulations on his way back to Ithaca. I mean, no wonder why he cries a lot. He probably has PTSD, okay?
I would have to agree with you, Joey. I think it's the longing for home. It is the recognition of all that was lost, all the destruction that he was personally responsible for. He was the mechanism of action to have a lot of these things happen. He doesn't really have anyone to confide in at that moment either. He's just sitting there with his own overwhelming emotions. He can't tell anyone. He can't acknowledge that it's him. It's the wrong time for him to come out and say, actually, that's me. I'm Odysseus. That would be all of my things. And so it was a very tender moment to think, what would it be like to be this man who is celebrated as a warrior, but all he claims is that he wants to be home, but he has a lot of obstacles in his way before he can do that. And I think a lot of people look at this as psychological, the hero's journey. You have to venture out, figure out who you are, long for home, and then return. What is really striking to me at this point in my life, reading it 20 years since the first time I had read the story, or more, maybe it was 30 years ago, of the longing for home and the desire to reconnect with your people without the understanding that 10 years of the war plus 10 years getting back, he's not back yet, but it'll be 10 years before he gets back. What happens in someone else's life in 20 years? You're not going to have whatever you had. It's not coming back. You're going to have something, but it's not going to be what you left. And I think that's really something that has been on my mind personally, about the passage of time and what that does to relationships.
That's a good point about him not having any companions left from Troy to speak to, because he either has to explain who he is, and then I'm sure he will get a ton of questions, or people will be like, oh my God, that's really cool. Tell me all about Troy. And he's like, I would actually rather not tell you about that murder fest. It was literally war. We were fighting with gods as well. The gods were heavily involved, as they often are in Greek myth. So he doesn't have anyone to just sort of take a deep breath around and not have to over-explain anything. He doesn't have someone that has the shorthand he could speak to and be like, oh, yeah, okay, you get where I'm at mentally. It's not good right now. I was just triggered by this bard and I need a minute, but he can't articulate that.
How hard would it be to be surrounded by people who have this hero worship of you? They are lauding him as the savior of the Greek people in this war. Had it not been for him, things would have gone very differently. What does that do to your psyche as a person when everyone around you thinks you're this amazing person that did all of this good? And you're like, actually, I'm a liar. I'm an adulterer. I steal things. I killed a lot of people, caused a lot of mayhem. It's just a very interesting thing to think about. If you were Odysseus, do you own all of the complexities of your personality, or you're just like, yeah, that's me. I'm the hero. That's true. That all sounds good. More of that, please.
Yeah. And I think you can also see that in Menelaus, because when he's talking to Telemachus, he also says, I would give a lot of what I have currently to get back my friends from Troy. And that's a lot. This is a very big moment, I think, in the story. And again, I think it really helps to dismantle this stereotypical masculinity, because you would assume that Menelaus would rather have these material goods and power. And he's like, I really don't want that, but I would really love to see my friends again. And just like such a beautiful moment.
Yes, that there's nothing more important in your life than your relationships.
Thank you for watching or listening to today's episode. And if you loved it, you should like, comment, and subscribe, and follow us on TikTok at Extra Literary Affairs. And next week, we're going to be reading the next 8 books from 8 to 16. So if you want to follow along and read the Odyssey with us, please do. And you can check out our next episode. Okay, bye.